Recognizes Representative Shannon to your right for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the representative yield?
I do.
So I appreciate that in this bill you're dealing with the emergency room services where it clearly states that patients will not be balanced bill for that. But the question I have is around lines 254 through 257, where the bill also talks about how if a patient goes through a process where they end up having a provider that is out of network. Let's say, for example, if you get a colonoscopy and then the anesthesiologist that the hospital chooses or the doctor's office chooses is out of network, the patient would not be billed for more than what is their copay deductible, which in some cases, a deductible, as you mentioned before with the high deductible plans, could be like $7,500. So on the one hand, you're closing the door on people receiving really large bills like $100,000 just being billed straight for whatever the anesthesiologist did, but at the same time, you're leaving the door open for people to get really high bills with, being billed up to the total amount their deductible.
Right.
The question I have is around lines 254 through 257. The bill also says that if the provider decides that the deductible that they are going to bill the patient for is not enough for the work that was provided, you could go into a situation of arbitration that could include the patient. Who pays the bill? And this is the question. Sorry it took so long to get there, but this is really important.
Sure.
Who pays the bill if a situation arises where the provider says, hey, the deductible amount is not enough, the doctor needs to receive more payment for the work that he or she has done, and so you go into a situation of arbitration. Whatever the result of that arbitration is, who pays that amount?
That arbitration is described in the arbitration piece later in this bill, and that will be between the provider and the insurer. And they will go through arbitration through the commissioner's office, and it's a baseball arbitration where one side puts in an amount, the other side puts in an amount. If they can't agree within 30 days, arbitrator steps in and one amount's chosen. Now, you were earlier referring to Section 9. Section 9 was placed in the bill because of the out-of-network facility. So it references 3020E-4. That's the emergency section. So for emergencies, if you go to an out-of-network hospital, you can go through arbitration. For non-emergencies, you cannot do that. Typically, when you go to a in-network facility, you have the ability to ask that provider, is anyone else involved with this procedure? So we cannot, as far as providers, you still, will be covered. They cannot balance bill you for those behind them. But the facility can, an in-network facility is in contract, so they can bill you. And we could not include in-network facilities. Believe me, that thought crossed my mind, but that was enough to topple the whole bill.
Does the representative yield for an additional question?
Sure.
But again, back on lines 254 through 257, it says that a patient could be involved in that arbitration, and I just don't see anything in the bill that says that whatever the result of the arbitration that comes out of it, the bill is not going to go back to that patient.
No. What that section is speaking to is that the provider's ability to request arbitration, not the patient,
right,
for a single patient. In other words, they're going to ask for arbitration for a single patient, single procedure, multiple procedures, multiple patients. It's describing what the provider can ask arbitration for. In none of those cases is the patient liable for any of this. This is only between the provider and the insurer.
Well, then why does line 254 say that a patient may be involved? I guess what I'm concerned about is that we're closing the door on surprise bills on one side, but it feels like we're opening it on another side because you're saying that the patient could be dragged into arbitration if the provider feels that they're not getting enough payment for their services, and there's nothing in the bill that says the patient can't then receive that bill, which is the result of arbitration, in addition to the fact that you've added that patients could be billed up to the amount of their deductible, which for some people is $7,500. It's less than $100, but it's also still enough to bankrupt somebody.
I understand your question, and the confusion is coming in. You're in the section of arbitration. This is between the provider and the insurer. The wording that you're referring to is only those cases that the provider is in arbitration with the insurer. In other words, a provider can go into arbitration with one patient's, challenging one patient's payment, what they paid, the insurer paid for that patient for one procedure, for multiple procedures, multiple patients, for multiple procedures. That's just delineating what the provider can bring arbitration. That is to avoid arbitration for the same patient, same procedure, or multiple patients for the same procedure, and you end up with 200 arbitrations that are involving only a few codes. This does not create a problem for the patient.
So just one final question, if
Okay.
I may.
Sure.
I understand what you're saying is that the lines 254 through 57 are talking about the events or the occurrences of what may have happened with one patient, so one patient situation. But what I'm asking is there's arbitration that's referenced a lot in this bill, and it's
Right.
a pretty long bill.
Right.
Nowhere in the bill does it say that the results of any of these arbitrations would not go back to that individual patient. And that's what I'm...
It is referenced later in the bill. The arbitration is
Okay, where?
only between the insurer and the physician. And it says later in the arbitration that when the arbitrator makes that decision, the loser pays. That is the insurer or the provider. The patient's been taken out of this whole arbitration. They're not involved in the arbitration.
Can you just tell me where in the bill it says that? What lines?
Well, it says it multiple times, but at the very end of the bill, it says,
Because I see where the loser pays. I just don't see where there's a guard against that bill going back to the patient. That's what I
Okay.
don't see.
it says, again, one other reference to it's on 342. Once request for arbitration has been filed with the Insurance Commission by a provider or facility under this chapter, neither such provider or facility nor the insurer in such a dispute will file a lawsuit in the court regarding the out-of-network claim. Over and over again, it talks about the provider and the insurer.
But that doesn't say...
It never goes back to the patient in the arbitration.
Yes, and I thank you for pointing out those lines. I'm just saying that it doesn't say that that bill can't go back to the patient. And I'm looking at what you just read, but that doesn't say anything about who could be responsible for the final bill.
Well, I don't know a way to put it to you. I apologize, but in many places in this, it says that the arbitration is between the provider and the insurance, and is regulated under the Commissioners of Insurance and
Thank you.
arbitration.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
Do you